Fans thought Keith Urban and Nicole Kidman were living the kind of dream life that only Hollywood couples talk about. Decades of love, stability, and a partnership everyone envied. But what no one realized was that something quiet, something deeply personal, was shifting long before their divorce became headline news. And the strangest part, the clues weren't buried in tabloids. They weren't leaked through insiders. They were hiding in plain sight inside Keith Urban's own music. Months before anyone knew the marriage was unraveling, Keith was already on stage performing a song that hit a little too close to home. At the time, nobody thought much of it. Fans clapped, smiled, and took in the performance like they always did. But after the divorce news broke, people rushed back to that footage, and what they discovered shocked them. The lyrics, the tone, the emotion, everything suddenly felt like a confession disguised as art. The idea itself is haunting. What if Keith was singing the truth because he couldn't say it out loud? What if the only place he felt safe expressing the cracks in his marriage was through music? Artists have always turned their real-life struggles into stories, but the way Keith's song lined up with the eventual collapse of his 19-year marriage has fans convinced this wasn't coincidence. It was a warning sign everyone missed. People started dissecting the performance. The way Keith paused between lines, the almost shaky breath he took before hitting the chorus, the way his eyes dropped whenever certain lyrics came up. At the time, these moments just seemed like emotional artistry. But in retrospect, viewers say it looks like someone carrying something heavy, something he wasn't ready to share yet. And then there's the timeline. The performance happened before the world knew anything, before the public statements, before the headlines, before the speculations. It feels almost like Keith was letting the pain slip through his music while still trying to hold the pieces together behind closed doors. Fans online now say it's surreal to rewatch that moment. They claim the sadness was there all along, they just didn't know what it meant. Others believe the emotional delivery was intentional, a way for Keith to work through something he couldn't control. But the biggest theory, that he was telling the world his marriage was falling apart, without ever saying a word. And the deeper you look into the story, the clearer one thing becomes. The performance wasn't just a song, it was a message, a quiet signal of a storm building behind the scenes. But this was only the beginning, and the timeline gets even more interesting when you see what happened next. Long before the world heard the word divorce, something in Keith Urban and Nicole Kidman's carefully guarded life had already shifted. When the official announcement finally dropped in late September, it hit like a shockwave. But to people paying attention, it felt less like a sudden explosion and more like the end of a long, quiet unraveling. Reports claimed the couple had been drifting into separate routines months earlier, and the public statement was simply the moment when private truth finally collided with public reality. For nearly 2 decades, they had been one of Hollywood's most admired pairings, the rare marriage that seemed to survive the pressure of fame. But around mid-year, eagle-eyed fans began noticing little signs that something wasn't quite right. Nicole appeared at several industry events alone. Keith was touring more intensely, taking selective appearances that were noticeably independent. At first, fans brushed it off as the natural clash of two demanding careers. Then, as the months rolled on, the distance felt harder to ignore. Entertainment writers started hinting gently that the couple was navigating separate paths. Nothing explosive, nothing scandalous, but just enough to spark whispers. Even then, outlets stayed cautious because Keith and Nicole had always protected their private world fiercely. They avoided drama. They avoided spectacle, which is why the silence began to feel louder. By the time September arrived, rumors had reached a steady buzz. Some reports suggested they had been living largely apart during the summer. Others claimed their work schedules had completely stopped overlapping, creating a quiet gulf between them. And then, finally, the confirmation dropped. They were ending their marriage. No dramatic statements, no finger-pointing, just a carefully worded announcement that acknowledged their long relationship and the difficult decision to part ways. Fans were stunned. How could a couple that looked so solid suddenly reach this point? How could a relationship that had lasted nearly 20 years fall apart without the world noticing? But that's the thing, people had noticed. They just didn't understand what the signs meant. It was only after the news became official that everything else started falling into place, including the emotional weight behind the song Keith had performed earlier in the year. Once the timeline became public, viewers went back to older interviews, recent stage moments, and subtle details that didn't make sense before. Suddenly, those quiet pauses, that emotional tone, the distance in certain appearances, it all painted a picture of a couple carrying a weight the world wasn't meant to see yet. The official announcement didn't just confirm the split, it reframed the entire past year. It turned scattered observations into a cohesive timeline. It exposed hints that had been hiding in plain sight. And most importantly, it lit the spark that made fans revisit Keith's earlier performances with fresh eyes. But the real turning point, the moment that fueled all the speculation, came from one song in particular, and that's where things get even more intriguing. When people look back at the entire story, everything seems to orbit around one moment. Keith Urban standing under stage lights, singing a track that now feels almost prophetic. Messed Up As Me wasn't just another addition to his album. At the time, it was heard as a dramatic, emotionally heavy song about two people who keep circling back to each other even when the relationship is clearly breaking them apart. But after the divorce announcement, that same track took on an entirely different meaning. The song had already been released earlier in the year, but it didn't catch deeper attention until Keith performed it again on the road, his show that aired months before the world learned about the split. Back then, viewers simply treated it as a passionate performance, Keith doing what he always does, pouring emotion into every lyric. But now, fans can't stop analyzing it. To them, it doesn't feel like a performance anymore. It feels like someone finally letting their guard down. The lyrics themselves read like a relationship post-mortem. Lines about emotional exhaustion, broken communication, and two people who love hard but fall apart even harder hit differently once you know what was happening behind closed doors. The song talks about a love that's messy, unpredictable, and painful, a connection that keeps pulling two people in even as it tears them apart. For many listeners, the parallels were impossible to ignore. What made it even more intense was Keith's delivery. During the performance, there were subtle hesitations, a long breath before certain lines, a softer tone on the verses that dealt with emotional collapse. At the time, people assumed he was just leaning into the drama of the song. But with the breakup now public, fans replayed those moments and began to believe he was expressing something real, something personal, something he couldn't say any other way. It also didn't help that around that period, influencers, bloggers, and music commentators had started whispering about trouble in paradise. Nothing confirmed, nothing solid, but enough ambiguity that people began connecting dots. The emotional weight of Messed Up As Me fit those whispers almost too well. Suddenly, listeners started asking, was Keith trying to tell us something? Was this song his way of coping? Or was he working through heartbreak long before anyone knew there was heartbreak to work through? Even music critics noted that the track felt unusually raw compared to his usual upbeat or polished style. It carried a kind of wounded honesty, like someone trying to untangle years of hurt inside a 3-minute melody. And once the divorce news hit, that honesty stopped feeling artistic and started feeling autobiographical. Whether Keith intended to hint at anything or not, Messed Up As Me has become the unofficial soundtrack to the end of their marriage. Fans now call it the song that said everything before the headlines did. But if the track itself was emotional, the lyrics inside it were even more revealing, and they're where the real speculation started picking up speed. Once fans rewatched Keith Urban's performance of Messed Up As Me, the focus quickly shifted to the lyrics themselves. What once seemed like a generic exploration of a failing relationship suddenly felt intimate, raw, and startlingly specific. Lines like "You're falling to pieces on the inside" and "Misery still loves company" began circulating on social media, with viewers pointing out how they seemed to describe a couple who had been quietly struggling for months. The words weren't just storytelling, at least to fans. They read like a personal diary set to music. The song explores the dynamic of two people who can't seem to let go, even as they hurt each other repeatedly. Phrases about returning to someone despite knowing it's wrong struck a chord with audiences now aware of the couple's long-standing marriage. Social media posts dissected every lyric, pairing lines with known events in the couple's public life. Observers suggested that Keith's words mirrored private struggles, missing appearances together, subtle emotional distance, and unspoken tension in interviews. Keith himself had described the track in an earlier interview as being about a dysfunctional relationship. At the time, it sounded like a typical artistic explanation, something relatable for anyone who's been through ups and downs. But once the divorce news broke, that explanation suddenly felt layered. Fans began to read between the lines. Was this just a general reflection, or was it a coded message about his own life? The ambiguity became a magnet for speculation, creating endless discussion threads online dissecting every phrase. Beyond just the lyrics, the emotional delivery heightened the effect. Urban's voice carried a subtle weariness in key moments, a slight crack, a drawn-out note signaling vulnerability. Combined with lines about internal struggle and mutual hurt, the performance started to feel less like an abstract story and more like a real emotional confession. Fans noted that the timing of the performance, months before the public split, added an eerie layer of foreshadowing. It was as if the song had been written and performed as a safe way to process pain before facing the world. The lyrics themselves touched on themes of inevitability and repeated mistakes, phrases like "We're too broken to fix, yet we keep trying." This kind of introspection resonated deeply with those following the couple's journey. It wasn't just about heartbreak in general. It now seemed almost like a blueprint of the emotional trajectory of their marriage, the gradual unraveling that remained hidden until the announcement. Some fans even suggested that the song captured Keith's feelings of helplessness and resignation, making it one of the most personal and confessional moments of his career. Critics and casual listeners alike began to comment on the uncanny parallels between the song and the unfolding events. Social media buzzed with posts framing the lyrics as foreshadowing, while YouTube reaction videos highlighted the emotional weight of each line. The song became a central point of analysis for anyone trying to understand how a seemingly perfect couple could quietly reach the decision to part ways. But the story isn't just in the words, it's also in Keith's emotional state during the performance, which gave fans even more reason to wonder about the depth of his feelings. If the lyrics of Messed Up As Me sparked speculation, it was Keith Urban's delivery that truly sent fans into overdrive. Watching the performance on the road months before the divorce became public, people couldn't help but notice subtle signs of strain, vulnerability, and something almost unspoken in his demeanor. It wasn't just a song, it was an emotional experience, and viewers started reading every pause, every breath, and every glance as a window into his private life. From the opening notes, there was a heaviness in his voice that hadn't always been present in previous performances. Keith is known for his polished, confident stage presence. But during this particular song, fans noticed a different energy. There were moments when he closed his eyes for longer than usual, as if the lyrics were connecting to something deeply personal. At times, he would pause mid-line, almost catching himself before moving forward, which many interpreted as evidence that he was channeling real-life pain rather than performing a character's story. Even small gestures added to the intensity. A subtle shake of his head, a gentle inhale before hitting emotional lines, or a quiet exhale at the end of a verse. All of these tiny details suggested a performer carrying weight far beyond the music. Fans and commentators noted that the performance didn't feel staged. It felt lived, authentic, and almost confessional. Some even claimed they could see the tension of years-long struggles reflected in his posture and expressions, adding a layer of poignancy to the lyrics. The timing of the performance only fueled speculation. Months before the world knew about the divorce, Keith's emotional delivery hinted at unspoken stress. Viewers revisiting the footage after the split were struck by how the sadness seemed almost prescient, as if the song was a vessel for feelings that could not yet be articulated publicly. Fans described watching the video as watching a man perform the truth he couldn't say out loud, and social media was flooded with reactions connecting each subtle cue to possible marital strain. Even music critics weighed in. While they praised the song's lyrical depth and Keith's musical talent, many remarked on the unusually raw vulnerability displayed in the performance. Some described it as a departure from his more upbeat or carefully controlled songs, noting that this track carried a weight, a quiet tension, and an emotional fragility rarely seen in his stage work. The combination of lyrics and delivery created a narrative that seemed to mirror the couple's private struggles, reinforcing fan theories that Keith's music was a safe outlet for what he couldn't yet share with the public. The emotional state captured in this performance became a talking point for months. It wasn't just about singing a song well. It was about living the song, expressing something deeply personal through music while keeping it just abstract enough to protect privacy. For fans, that ambiguity was what made the performance so compelling. It was art and confession rolled into one, leaving viewers both captivated and curious about what life behind the curtain might have been like. And if fans were interpreting Keith's emotional energy, they were also connecting it with hidden clues elsewhere, small, subtle signs that suggested the couple had been struggling long before headlines revealed it. Once the news of Keith Urban and Nicole Kidman's split went public, fans began digging through months of their public appearances, social media posts, and interviews, looking for signs that might have gone unnoticed. What they found only added fuel to the speculation. Subtle patterns that seemed to suggest a quietly unraveling marriage, hidden in plain sight. Every detail, every nuance, suddenly gained new weight in the context of the divorce. For starters, the couple's social media behavior had shifted over time. Nicole, who normally shared personal family moments and milestones with Keith, began posting fewer pictures of them together. Keith, likewise, kept his updates more focused on music, touring, and professional projects rather than their personal life. Fans interpreted this change as a possible reflection of distance, a shift that suggested they were slowly living more independent lives while still married in name. Public appearances also provided hints. There were events where Nicole appeared alone or with family, while Keith's appearances seemed increasingly solo. In interviews, both maintained warmth and professionalism, but some viewers noted that their smiles and interactions lacked the usual spark. These subtle differences weren't dramatic, but in hindsight, they painted a picture of a couple who may have been emotionally disconnected long before the official announcement. Even casual observers noticed behavioral shifts during events together. Shortened interactions, brief eye contact, or polite but distant conversation on the red carpet became points of discussion online. Fans dissected each video clip, connecting these small moments to the broader narrative suggested by Keith's song performance months earlier. Every pause, every glance, every gesture started to feel like another piece of the puzzle. Fans also looked at interviews and statements from friends, insiders, and industry commentators. While no one confirmed details of the marriage privately, hints emerged about differing schedules, long periods apart, and unspoken struggles. Some media reports suggested they had been quietly negotiating personal boundaries and career commitments, navigating a life where their professional worlds took precedence over shared personal time. Interestingly, some even revisited Keith's performances beyond Messed Up As Me, looking for subtle emotional cues. They found a consistent theme, a slightly heavier tone, reflective pauses, and a more introspective energy during certain songs. The interpretation that Keith may have been processing real-life experiences through his music long before the public understood the situation. To fans, it was almost as if each lyric and each performance was a breadcrumb trail leading to the truth of the marriage. By piecing together these hidden clues, social media behavior, public appearances, and performance energy, the story that emerged was not of a sudden split, but a slow-motion unraveling. Fans suggested that the divorce announcement simply confirmed what had been quietly observable for months, a couple struggling behind the scenes, maintaining appearances while navigating private challenges. And it's this gradual build-up, these small, almost imperceptible hints, that makes Keith's song feel so much like foreshadowing. But what really cements the connection is how the song's timing aligns with these hidden clues. When you step back and look at the timeline, timeline, the connection between Keith Urban's Messed Up As Me and his divorce from Nicole Kidman starts to feel almost uncanny. The song was performed months before the world knew anything about their split, yet the lyrics, delivery, and emotional undertones all align eerily well with what fans later understood about their private struggles. This alignment is what makes the song feel like foreshadowing, a glimpse into a story that hadn't yet been publicly told. The timing is key. Messed Up As Me was performed on the road early in the year, a full stretch of months before the official divorce announcement in September. At that moment, Keith was singing about a relationship that was messy, painful, and complicated. Lines describing internal turmoil, repeated mistakes, and emotional exhaustion didn't seem out of place in a generic sense. Many fans could relate to that type of love story. But with the hindsight of the divorce news, every lyric started to resonate differently. What had once been interpreted as artistic expression now appeared prophetic. Fans began to notice patterns that made the song even more suggestive. The emotional delivery, the pauses, and the subtle gestures all hinted at lived experience. People online discussed how Keith's somber tone and almost confessional style gave the impression that he wasn't just performing a character, he was expressing something real. It was as if the music itself had become a safe space for him to process emotions that couldn't yet be shared publicly. Moreover, the lyrics themselves mirrored the quiet distance fans had observed between Keith and Nicole over the preceding months. The song spoke of two people who are drawn together but fundamentally at odds, a cycle of love and conflict that reflects what observers believed was happening behind closed doors. Social media quickly became a forum for debate, with posts like, "It's like he knew this was coming," or "He's singing his truth months early," capturing the intrigue. YouTube reactions dissected every verse, every line, and every inflection, building a narrative that made the performance seem almost like a coded message. Critics also commented on the authenticity of the song. Unlike other tracks that might be purely narrative or fictionalized, Messed Up As Me felt grounded in real emotion. Its reflective, sometimes melancholic tone added credibility to fan theories that Keith's music was revealing more than he could openly say. The combination of lyrics, delivery, and timing created a perfect storm of speculation, enough to convince many that the song had foreshadowed the couple's breakup. But perhaps the most fascinating element is how this foreshadowing blurs the line between art and life. Keith Urban has always drawn inspiration from personal experiences, and this performance appears to follow that pattern. Fans weren't just listening to a song, they were witnessing a man's emotional truth unfold before anyone outside his inner circle could confirm it. And that truth only became fully clear once the divorce was made public. Yet even with lyrics, timing, and emotion aligning, the public's fascination didn't stop there. Rumors, debates, and fan theories kept spreading, showing that the story wasn't just about the song itself. It was about the hidden clues surrounding their lives. Long before anyone knew the full picture, once Keith Urban and Nicole Kidman's divorce became official, the public reaction was immediate, intense, and in many ways revealing. Fans, commentators, and social media users scrambled to piece together the story, analyzing everything from past performances to interviews and subtle public appearances. The song Messed Up As Me became the central point in almost every discussion, and online theories exploded, fueling curiosity and speculation about the couple's private struggles. Fans divided almost immediately. Some insisted that Keith had been subtly signaling his heartbreak long before the headlines appeared. They pointed to the lyrics, the timing of the performance, and his emotional delivery as evidence that he had been processing his marriage's unraveling through music. To these viewers, the song wasn't just a track on an album. It was a window into Keith's personal life, a glimpse of feelings he couldn't share publicly. Every sigh, every pause, every reflective look during the performance suddenly felt like a confession. Others, however, cautioned against reading too much into the song. They argued that lyrics about relationships are often universal, designed to connect with a broad audience. They warned that while fans might interpret every detail as foreshadowing, the performance could simply be emotional artistry, the kind Keith is known for. These debates created a lively online environment, with fans posting clips, dissecting lyrics line by line, and comparing the performance to public appearances before the divorce. Threads on Reddit, TikTok, and Twitter became hubs for theory crafting, with hashtags dedicated to analyzing Keith's emotional cues. Celebrity gossip outlets also joined the discussion. Articles framed the song as an early indicator of marital trouble, often citing unnamed sources or fan interpretations. Media coverage amplified the sense of drama, connecting lyrics with possible real-life struggles without making unverified claims. The narrative quickly spread, creating a feedback loop where fans, speculation, and media coverage reinforced each other, giving the song a life of its own in the context of the breakup. YouTube reaction videos exploded as well. Fans created analyses highlighting Keith's gestures, pauses, and facial expressions during the performance, often juxtaposed with key moments from the couple's appearances over the preceding months. These videos not only fueled debate, but also generated curiosity from casual viewers who may not have followed the couple's life closely. The song became a talking point far beyond music circles, sparking discussions about the blurred line between personal experience and artistic expression. One of the most fascinating elements of the public reaction was how it blended interpretation interpretation with emotional investment. Fans weren't just theorizing, they were emotionally connecting, projecting empathy onto Keith's performance, and trying to make sense of a relationship they had admired from afar. The song became more than music. It became a symbol of the private struggles, the heartbreak, and the gradual unraveling of what had appeared to be a perfect Hollywood marriage. But beyond the reactions, debates, and fan theories, there's a final perspective to consider: the story as told in stages, from performance to divorce announcement, showing how this narrative unfolded in a way that only Keith's music could hint at. Looking back, the saga of Keith Urban and Nicole Kidman's split reads less like a sudden Hollywood shock and more like a story told in carefully measured stages. From subtle social cues to emotionally charged performances, the narrative unfolded gradually, leaving breadcrumbs that only hindsight could fully interpret. And at the heart of it all lies Messed Up As Me, a song that, intentionally or not, captured the essence of a marriage quietly drifting apart. The public first learned about the split in September 2025, but fans quickly realized that the signs had been there long before. Keith's performances, particularly on the road, were retrospectively seen as a prelude to the official announcement. The lyrics, the delivery, and the raw emotion conveyed in the song created a compelling portrait of someone grappling with personal challenges behind the stage lights. For fans, it was almost as if Keith had been narrating the story in real time, allowing music to become a vessel for private truths. Social media and fan forums erupted with theories connecting performance moments, lyrics, and public appearances to the couple's evolving dynamic. Every pause, every sigh, every hint of melancholy in Keith's performances was scrutinized and interpreted as a window into his life. Observers debated whether the song's confessional tone was intentional foreshadowing or coincidental artistry. Regardless, the public fascination highlighted a broader truth. Art often communicates what words cannot, and in this case, music became an indirect lens into an intimate chapter of Keith and Nicole's lives. Critics and fans alike began to view the story as a layered narrative. Rather than a single event, the announcement of the divorce, the breakup appeared as a series of emotional beats. Each subtle clue, from social media behavior to public appearances, and of course the song itself, added texture to the overarching story. The narrative wasn't abrupt. It was unfolding, measured, and in some ways tragic. Fans started to appreciate the nuance, recognizing that the couple's outwardly perfect image had masked years of internal struggles. The symbolic power of Messed Up As Me also resonated deeply. It became more than a track. It was a sonic record of emotion, a personal chronicle that coincided with public observations. Listeners described it as an unintended preview of the marriage's end, a moment when art intersected with reality in the most poignant way. The song allowed fans to connect emotionally, to experience the story vicariously, and to understand the complexity of a long-term relationship quietly unraveling. Ultimately, the Keith Urban and Nicole Kidman story demonstrates how modern celebrity lives are layered narratives, part public, part private, part interpreted through art. The song's foreshadowing, whether intentional or serendipitous, provided a rare glimpse into the emotional reality behind a celebrated marriage. It reminded the audience that even the most admired relationships can harbor hidden struggles, and that sometimes the truth is best revealed in melody, pauses, and carefully chosen words. And as fans continue to revisit performances, lyrics, and subtle clues, the story lives on, a reminder that art can prelude reality, and that sometimes the most compelling narratives are the ones told in stages, quietly, and with depth that only time can reveal.